Hello, everyone, and welcome back to season 3 of the Lodge Podcast. I am your host, Scott Milley, and I'm so excited today to introduce today's uniquely talented guest, Xsolla's country manager for Canada, John Nguyen. John, how you doing today?
Good. How are you, Scott?
I'm fantastic. I'm just ready to be back for season 3. This episode is for the devs. John and I are going to be talking all things Xsolla. What does the company do? How can they help you and your studio grow? And much, much more. So, without further ado, let's get into the conversation. So, John, first thing I want to get into is a little bit about you. Of course, the main part of this conversation is going to be diving into Xsolla, but I want people to get to know who John is first. Is that okay with you?
That's fine with me.
Perfect. So the first question I want to ask you is, how did you get your start into this industry? I know it's a generic question. I know you've had to answer it 100 times, but what's your elevator pitch on where has John been?
Where's John been? Well, okay, I have a decade and a half of experience in this industry right now, so as we speak. But how I got started was, how deep dive do you want to go? So let's just go right before I got into the industry. So I used to be marketing in the tabletop industry. You guys might know Heavy Gear. It's a big tabletop franchise. There was some video games done in the 90s with Activision. There was a fully animated mini series as well with Sony Entertainment. So I was working marketing uh, for these guys in the early 2000s. And basically, one day, a mod group came and knocked on my door and said, "Hey, let's do the third Heavy Gear game." And I was like, "All right, let's do it. Let's go. Right? Let's go. Let's do
Heck
this."
yeah.
Right? So we signed the licensing deal, and it came with me. But that was a personal side story. So I actually ended up joining these modders. These modders were particularly interesting to us because these guys have the pedigree of building out the mech packs for Mech Warrior 4. So some of the mech nerds out there,
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
us. Right? So that's how I got
Wow.
my start. Company was called StompyBot Productions. We were based in St. John, New Brunswick. And from that point, basically we grew from what, 5, 6 dudes to 40, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Eventually becoming our own publisher. So basically, there was two companies in the mix. There was Stompiebot Corporation, which was basically the publishing wing, and then our original studio became a subsidiary of that studio. So that's how we got funded. That's how we became a publisher as well. So we were doing our own title, Heavy Gear Assault, but we were also doing third party publishing. So we were doing, we had a couple games in the mix as well. So there I got to be not only a corporal shill for the corporal side of it, right? So administration and VP. I was also a producer. I was also a game designer. I was also a level designer to a certain extent. And also, I worked a lot with art because I had worked with the original IP for so long,
Mhm.
right? I was also had a lot. I had a lot of feedback into the actual artistic direction of the video game. So
So you kind of kicked off getting your finger in every part of the actual development process as well as learning the corporate side and the publishing side all in one.
right. So I was hit by a gigantic fire hose,
Yeah, there
right?
you go. Yep, that's one way to put
and
it for
and
sure.
and boom. But I did start developing my game design chops while we were working at tabletop. I mean, I released several supplements for the tabletop, right? And those
Mhm.
are all game mechanics. And essentially, one of those books is essentially a GDD. So,
Oh wow. Yeah,
right,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
right. It's just that you have to do the math. It's
Good
not
point.
the program that's doing the math. It's not the game doing the math. It's you having to do the math. But it is what it is. It's still a GDD, right? It's still core gameplay mechanics being looped in again and again, right? Level design was to a certain extent setting up the kitchen table to be able to play, right?
Yeah,
So
it's a good point.
no, all those skills are transferable over to video games. So yeah, it was a gigantic fire hose, but at the same time, I do touch all these different aspects. And after my studio, I did a lot of consulting work as well.
Mhm.
So I continued on with business development, marketing, but I always spoke the dev talk, right? So I'm very familiar of how the sausage is made. So
which we don't get to see, I think, as often as we would like. So, like, I'm sure that that has been an invaluable skill for you throughout your years, especially as we fast forward. What is it? Almost 12 years after that first initial start to your time
that's right.
beginning at Xsolla.
Yeah, so I'm saying I'm getting close to about a decade and a half, say.
So, what was it originally that drew you to Xsolla? What was that like? What was it looking at this company and like meeting the people and saying, you know what, this is what I want to do with the next phase of my career?
So, like many people listening to this podcast, I have no idea what Xsolla did.
We're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that.
um, but once I discovered a little more about Xsolla, I saw that Xsolla represented a force multiplier because um, I did a couple of other companies after that, right?
Mhm,
And I was involved in another startup that was also based in New Brunswick that had to do with gaming, and it was TurboPlay, which was a video game platform, a store, if you will,
mhm,
right? Designed specifically for indie games, but it also had a Web3 element to it before it was called Web3, right?
mhm,
Um, and one of the things I found out, and also with my consultancy work in fintech and payments, is that these payments and how to get money, right, from a paying player is one of the most difficult problems to solve in the video game industry. And Xsolla solves this, but not only solves this, but solves it for everyone and makes it easy for everyone. So that was my initial contact with Xsolla.
mhm.
And I realized, having tried to do this myself, that there was a turnkey solution for this, and it opened up the door to more and more. So I peeled out away the onions, and I started realizing that there was more to this. There was a whole bunch more, but we'll get that to later, I guess.
We're
Like you
gonna get to
said.
that very shortly. The last thing I do want to ask you about your position and kind of when you got started with Xsolla. Um, what is something that you get to do regularly that you feel is such a fulfilling part of your role? So I know you get to go to all these conferences, and like I get to see you everywhere we go, and I know you go to all these other places all over the world, representing Xsolla and talking to studios. But what is something that isn't uniquely just fun, but it's something that you feel is fulfilling that you get to do every day?
Every day I get to push the needle on building out the Canadian industry. And specifically, one of the most rewarding things that happens on a near daily basis is the light bulb turning on in a dev's mind. So when I explain what we do and how that benefits their studio and the possibilities that this opens up, you see the light bulb go off at one point, right? And it's really funny because you go into a meeting with somebody and they're like, "Oh well, what are you trying to sell me?" Right?
Yep. Hmm.
Right? And then as the conversation evolves, at one point the light bulb switches on and they're like, "Oh, you're really not trying to sell me something. You're actually trying to help me."
Yeah. That fair enough. Yeah, yeah, 100%. Because I can imagine, especially going like you said, you've done so many years of biz dev, of having that experience of the initial reaction always being like, "Oh, this is another sales pitch," and
Right.
then they give you those few minutes, and it's you see the gears start turning. We're like, "No, this could actually really benefit me."
Right. And
Yeah.
and then they start seeing the possibilities, and then they start asking questions, right?
Which is what you want out of that is that you want that
Right.
flip where they start coming to you.
They're coming at me and they started asking questions about how to integrate and how this works, and like,
Mhm.
what else can I do with this? And that's, for me, is the most rewarding part, right? It's really knowing that, hey, wait a minute, I'm actually really here to help, and I'm actually a force multiplier for your business.
So I think that segues us in perfectly to the chunk of this conversation that I want to get into. So Xsolla is a massive company, right? Global reach, accepting over 700 different payment methods, something that obviously we'll get into, and some of the biggest partners in the game from Ubisoft, Roblox, NetEase, and a ton more. So let's kick this off a little bit big picture. Zooming out, what does Xsolla do?
We're an e-com platform for specifically designed for studios. And by e-com platform, meaning all the business models that you can think of and all the monetization methodologies that you can think of we can work with you so that players can get their hands on your game globally. So day one, you can sell around the world. And not only that, you also, because we're an e-com platform, you get all the data surrounding that. And that's what the real power is. And we'll get in, you know, we can dive in and get into like all this a bit later because there's a lot to unpack here.
Mhm.
But that's essentially what we do. So we allow you to sell day one globally.
And I think you made a very good point there, and is something I'm looking forward to diving into. We can even unpack it a little bit now if you'd like.
Mhm.
Of that, most studios that we get to talk to, right, and most of the ones, at least in Canada, some of that information is readily available for this part of the world, right? But when you're talking about all these other like geographical locations all across the world, that global reach from Xsolla and that expertise and that information and knowledge, I feel has to be like borderline invaluable to some, especially some smaller indies or some people that are looking to kind of reach out of their niche. So you want to dive into that a little bit of like what type of information are you guys sharing with these studios, and what do you think like the direct benefit is of getting that knowledge and that experience from a company like Xsolla?
Well, being an indie dev myself, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Fair enough.
Right. And so what we offer, because we do business globally, and we do work with some massive players in the industry, but also work with a lot of smaller guys.
Mhm.
You know, we have access to a bunch of data about markets. We have access also to, so like you said, mentioned earlier, 700 payment methods. Like, what does that even mean, right? What is a
Yep.
payment method, right? A payment method is any way you can transact. Did you know in some parts of the world, for example, let's take India for giggles,
Mhm.
right? So let's take India's, and I'm gonna ask you, like, just off the cuff of the top of your head, how many PC players do you think are in India?
I know with that, so like with Asia as a whole, like the mobile market is obviously like
Right, but
huge,
I'm
right?
saying
No, but that's what I'm
specifically
saying is
India.
those would be the numbers that I would have more of an idea of. PC players, zero clue, no idea.
Zero clue.
Yeah,
About 300 million
PC,
PC players.
damn.
300 million. And how many how many players do you think are on, like, MAUs are on the platform we that shall be unnamed that sells PC games?
Fair enough. Um, probably at least over half of those, right? You would assume.
160 million monthly active user.
Nailed it.
Yeah,
Just over half.
about that, just about that. So here's the problem. These 300 million players are not buying on this platform because the payment method that they prefer in India is not supported.
Oh, okay, okay. So you're like
So in
so.
India,
Yep.
you're typically paid in cash.
Okay.
And so these are guys who work at the Microsoft call centers and like the Amazons and the big techs, right? And they're paid cash for the most part. They don't have bank accounts because it's very difficult to get a bank account in India,
Mhm.
and which means they don't have a credit card, which means they can't run PayPal, right?
That's a good point because that for me, that's always the default, at least just in my world, is that it's like if it's not credit card, it's not debit, any of that way. PayPal always just seems to be that like backup solution if you need to.
Right?
Yeah,
And I'm going to take like a social stance on this. The unbanked is a real thing in the world. There are people who are going on in life with no
100%.
credit card, no credit history, no banks, but they love to play games, and some of them are actually well employed. So, you
Yeah,
know,
fair
so
enough.
they
Yeah.
can't buy anything. So you know what they do? They take their pay, they do the exact opposite we do. So they go to a cash machine and they deposit this money into their mobile accounts, right? And one of the most,
Oh,
right,
damn.
you do the
Yeah,
exact
yeah.
opposite of
The
what we
exact
do. We
opposite.
pull
Yeah.
cash out of the machine, they're putting cash into the machine, right? So this charges up a mobile wallet. One
Mhm.
of the most popular in India is called Paytm. It's literally everywhere. There's a QR code, right? We're on vending machines and on street food and whatever,
Okay.
and they literally just scan the QR code and pay the merchant.
And that isn't like that particular payment method is not supported on the most popular PC platform.
Correct. And on many platforms, actually. So that's an example of a payment method. Here's another example. a 13-year-old kid gets a gift card for Pottery Barn for some reason from Granny, right?
Yep.
Yeah, like you, like you. So Natalie gets a Pottery Barn gift certificate from Nanny or whatever, right? Grandma. And you're like, well, what the heck am I gonna do with this, right? Well, you know what? You can use it to buy games
How?
because Xsolla, it's a supported Xsolla payment method.
Wow. So that's where the 700 comes in. If you guys are able to cover like all of those bases right there, that adds up quickly. I can appreciate
Exactly.
that.
Right. So if a studio has set up with Xsolla, they can take these different payment methods. So these are literally players who have no other ways to pay you that it suddenly can pay you.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I can see how that would be incredibly valuable for a lot of places all over the world.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reach equation. The reach equation is you may have players globally, but there's no way for them to pay for your game. Right. They would love to give you money and buy your game, but they can't.
There's no way to actually do that.
There's no way to actually do that. All right. Well, actually, there is a way that you could actually do that, right?
Yeah.
And it's up to the studios to actually set that up for them, right?
And give them that opportunity. Also,
Exactly.
just for listeners, our references to Natalie, as most of you know, our wonderful producer, isn't actually on camera, but she is in the booth on the ones and twos. So that is who John was pointing to for that Pottery Barn, because we know
When she
Natalie's
was pointing
cornhole.
at herself.
I know. Oh, I know. I saw her. So one of the things I did want to kind of get into, like on that notion, is talking kind of more of a direct hypothetical example, right? So I'm your average small studio. This is all hypothetical. A team of 5 to 10 people with a couple of games that we have released under our belt. Have found relative success in our niche, but are looking to expand and to grow the studio in scope, in talent, and most importantly, in revenue. Primarily, right now, our funding is being relied on from the government.
Yeah.
So Exola has been recommended to me from one of my friends, and I reach out. What does that initial conversation look like? What is Exola's response in that conversation?
Well, first of all, what do you do? What do you guys do? Do you do PC? Do you do consoles? What do you guys do?
So focus on PC for most of us, especially. We've talked about Ontario obviously on this podcast a lot. That is what
Right.
we represent. We have by far the most studios in the country, and a lot of those focus and launch on Steam first.
Yeah.
So that is something that we tend to focus on more the PC side of things. Of course, console as well, but for this particular situation, it would be PC.
Which is fantastic because my studio is PC
There you
for the
go.
most part, right? So, here's the deal. I mean, why are you contacting us like specifically? Are you contacting us to use our solutions or for the funding side?
So we've been looking at expanding, right? Like I mentioned, and I've talked to a couple of other friends in the industry, going to the IO Connects. There's a little
Yeah.
plug, and saying, Xsolla really helped us out. It was something that we didn't realize how much of a reach that we could actually get until we went through a company like this. So when it comes to your payment methods and it comes to kind of that global reach, is something we're looking for. We're looking to reach more people with this niche of a game that we're working on.
Okay, so you haven't launched a game. So basically, here's how we can help out, and here's how we can build the relationship from there.
Mhm.
All right. So so you already have an audience, but let's say you launched on the platform that you've been using.
Mhm.
You wouldn't really have any kind of data on it, right? You would know how many copies you've sold, maybe concurrent players, maybe you used a third party site to get some insights into how you're doing.
Yep.
Maybe you have some data on Facebook, right?
Mhm.
About the makeup of your community, but you really don't really see a full picture here, right?
Okay.
So here's what we're going to do, Scott. Let's say you're not ready to launch yet, but and it's kind of dicey with the government grants and stuff, right? So like, when
Mhm.
exactly do you sell? But let's say you can sell, right? You're there, right? um so you can actually do pre-orders, for example.
Okay.
So basically, essentially, you are selling a promise that you will deliver a packaged game,
Mhm.
right off the bat, globally to the world. So all you need to do is take the audience, and remember how I said data is the real power here, right?
Mhm.
So basically what you're doing is you're learning your audience. So you're taking the data, you're running an ad campaign, you're moving it to a site that you've built with Xsolla. Because remember, we're an e-com platform. So everything you know about things like Shopify, Squarespace, we can do, but
Mhm.
it is specifically tailored to video games. Right. So we're instead of selling actual physical goods, you're selling game keys, you're selling copies, you're selling DLCs, you're selling, microtrans, whatever you want to sell,
Mhm.
we have, right? We can accommodate. So basically, let's say you're selling game keys, right? And then maybe DLCs, because that seems to be the typical model in Ontario, right? So it seems that way,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So basically, let's do pre-order so you can start building up cash, right? But not only cash is only the one thing, but what you're also building is that you are linking all your pixels and all your trackers from your ad campaigns.
Okay.
So now you see, oh, wait a minute, I'm generating a lot of traffic in Canada. I'm generating a lot of traffic in Latin America. I'm generating traffic in Europe, right? So what does this mean, right? So then you double down on that. You're doing your A/B testing at that point, right? So now you're getting a better understanding of the traffic. You're getting a better understanding of why it's converting. And not only that, you can set up multiple pages to see what copy works better,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So now you're actually seeing actual real data that ecom people have been using and understand thoroughly. So this data, this knowledge on how to run campaigns like this exists. And not only that, we have ebooks and best practices to help you guys up and give you a clue as to where to look and where to deepen your knowledge base. We actually have best practices as well that we can share with you. We can share best practices from some of the studios. We have use cases. We also have case studies on people who have been successful doing stuff like this.
So getting studios to use more of like a market validated approach rather than like this is the kind of game we want to make and then seeing what works. It's like
Right?
you're seeing what's working as you're continuing to develop the game. You're not
But
learning after it's already released.
these are the kinds of things that the big boys have been doing for years,
Of course.
right?
Mhm.
Because the tools we offer to independent developers is the same level of tools that the AAAs are using. And so now you have your pre-orders set, right? You have a baseline idea of how your data works. So here's how we're going to layer on, right? We're going to layer it on. So now you're going to prepare your actual launch. What we have is the Xsolla Partner Network. So your marketing should have already started to identify some influencers,
Mhm.
right? But because you're a bootstrap indie, it's not necessarily in your possibilities or capabilities to pay them up front.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
here's where we can help. We can actually do a rev share model and pay them commission and make them affiliates of your studio.
You can do that through Xsolla?
You can do that through Xsolla. So
Okay.
you've set up a landing page, right?
Mhm.
That you're going to sell actual game keys. So whether that be the platform's keys or you're using a DRM free version that
Mhm.
we have a launcher. So we have a launcher on top of that, right? So that can generate DRM free keys,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And then those keys can actually help build like people who don't use traditional platforms can now download your game and pay for it and play your game independently
Just through Xsolla. So
just through
it's
Xsolla,
just
just
the
through our
studio
launcher.
to Xsolla, no platform, no.
No platform, no nothing, just the launcher, just off your
Okay.
site. Download the launcher, the launcher patches the game, installs the game, you're good to go. Every time you
Okay.
push a patch, the launcher will patch the game, right?
Mhm.
And this launcher can be integrated into the actual main build that you ship on traditional platforms. So now here's the kicker. You're
Yeah,
getting into
please.
launch, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then all the influencers have a copy of your keys. You can offer them a percentage on sales, and you can actually track who is selling what. So you're saying Scott is selling thousands of copies, and I can actually attribute that to Scott, and his rev share is 30%.
Mhm.
So the studio now gives 30% to Scott on all the sales he's doing. And not only that, you can set tiers to motivate them, right? So the first tier can be 25%, next tier is 30, next tier is 35, and you get access to their emails, right? So you invite a critical mass of your influencers on, and that actually tracks organically within the platform. And so you may actually start picking up traffic from influencers who are already using the platform looking for games to present to their audience.
So I think the influencer rev share side of Xsolla is something that very, very few people, at least in our community, know about. We know of Xsolla being that those 700 payment methods, right? That being like the kind
Yeah,
of the front facing thing and how to get that global reach. But that type of stuff, I think, is very important for people to know about because we talk about constantly that influencers struggle, right? And that side of indie devs and that being kind of the like the white whale, right? They're something that they're trying to reach
right.
for and not realizing that it can be it's achievable for them.
It is achievable. So that's the first layer. The next layer on top of that is we actually have something called drops. And this is a relatively new thing. And drops is handled by our sister company,
Mhm.
XLA. And basically we have a bunch of high tier influencers on retainer. And this is a little bit more of a curated process. There's like a selection process that goes through this because
Mhm.
obviously it's there's a little cost incurred here. But basically, you can, for the cost of product, keys or coupon codes or
Mhm.
whatever, all right, we can work with you to create a drop campaign with these influencers who are going to give away your product so that you can get users.
You
And so
so
that,
like would that lend itself like when I hear drops, obviously I'm thinking Twitch streamers, right? And
yeah,
thinking of that like some of those free things. So we have Digital Extremes, right? Is a member of Interact Ontario, and they're
right.
like one of the biggest in the world, and that's something that I see them doing constantly.
Yeah, wonder why. But but that is something that is available as well, right? So you
Mhm.
can actually do these drops and product drops constantly and build up your concurrent player base if you're doing like a multiplayer game, for example, or even just you want to have like a certain pickup in your algorithm. So basically every time, let's say you're selling platform keys, right? That activation, when somebody redeems that key, goes into the algorithm. It actually registers as a new user. So it actually helps your algorithm. It doesn't hurt it. And that's one of the things I repeatedly hear is like, oh, it's going to hurt my algorithm. It's not. It's actually going to help you,
It's actually going to benefit you.
right?
Yeah.
And so, and the other part, remember how I said the launcher part,
Yeah.
right?
Which
The
very
launch,
interesting to me. Yeah.
well, so the launcher part is the hub of your studio. It
Okay.
becomes hub of your studio. You know how some studios have their own launcher,
Yep.
regardless of where you bought the game?
Hmm.
The reason why is that you want to filter the traffic from these platforms onto your ecosystem, right?
Yep.
And we also have a login solution. So that helps you identify these players. So it, regardless of where they bought it, whether they came through your funnel, your marketing funnel that we've set up, or that it came organically from the platform, if you can identify these guys, now what do you have? You have a mailing list.
That's a good point. There are like other studios and other like big companies that have done this before, right? When they have their own launchers, very few have survived. What do you
Yeah.
think is it about Xsolla is that like allows you to continue to succeed and is something that is clearly
Well,
a viable business model for yourself?
the launcher is really interesting for a studio that's growing like like your hypothetical, because
Hmm.
basically what happens here is you what one of the biggest things we struggle as Canadian developers is to maintain and build audience and do it right.
Hmm.
And that comes from the way we do business, which I'm not going to get into because those who know me
Hmm.
and know my opinions on the matter. So 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 what this does is it makes you more and more independent and actually worthy of the term indie, right? So what does that
Hmm.
actually mean, being indie, right? Some people say it's this artistic thing, right? It's like the poor struggling artist that makes this experimental game that never been done before. Sure, okay, I guess, right? Um, for me, being an indie means to be financially free, right?
Being
You're
financially
behold-
independent.
financially independent, financially free, meaning that my games are selling and I know exactly who my audiences are. I I cater to this audience, right? And I make enough money to pay my people well, treat them
Hmm.
well, right? All right, give them decent living wages that fits their skill sets and experience. I can give them perks, right? I can treat them well, And to many, that's something super important to do. But in order to do that, you need to scale up. And being independent also means being responsible, right?
Hmm.
And being responsible means as at the end of the day, you are game developers, yeah, but you're also running a business. And to run a business in order to achieve financial freedom, financial independence, you need to learn things that are not fun, right?
Yep.
That are maybe not in your wheelhouse, right? Like marketing, like how to develop ethical retention methods, right? How to develop ethical monetization efforts, right?
Hmm.
Methodologies, and how to generate interest in your game. Because at the end of the day, you need to generate money, right?
Hmm.
And the thing is, don't be ashamed of selling your game. Don't be ashamed because we have that in Canada. We have that in our culture, right? Like me to a certain extent, I even have that, right? Because like, why
Hmm.
are we ashamed of selling our product? Is it because we view it as art? No, it's an entertainment product, and people are more than happy to pay you to enjoy your game.
I think
People,
that's a major thing. Creators, right? Like always having that kind of that issue. But it's like when you play games and it's like, do
right?
you have an issue forking out money for that? You're like, no, that was a wonderful experience. Like,
Absolutely.
why doesn't it work both ways? Or why don't we think that it works both ways?
Well, that's a question that we should look inwards and ask
Yeah,
ourselves,
100%.
right? We should be proud that people are willing to give you money for your work, right? It's validation. That's what
100%.
it means. But how do you harness that so that you can take care of your people, so that you can keep creating? Because that's the other part of being independent, is that you can make whatever games you want. You don't care. It's not some producer in Europe. It's not some producer in the States that's going to tell you that you need to change this or change that.
Hmm.
Right?
You by being financially independent, you get to be creatively independent in turn.
You get to be creatively independent and you get to do whatever you want and take care of your people.
So that actually lends itself to a question that I wanted to ask you. So at the beginning, when we were talking about this hypothetical, you're saying like, what is the avenue of why you're going to Xsolla? Are you going there for the payment methods and for the reach and the data, or are you going there for the funding? So, like I had mentioned with this hypothetical studio, relying a lot on government funding.
Right.
So, what is it about going in the path of Xsolla that you think sets them up for this future financial independence?
So we have several things that we can help on the funding side, but I'm
Mhm.
just going over like really quickly. You
Of
can
course.
actually obtain funding from our partners. So we actually do some level of matchmaking with
Okay.
publishers and funding partners that we
Mhm.
have gathered together. These are trusted partners that have funded games in the past.
Mhm.
And you're also entering a little bit into our ecosystem, right? So we're actually showing you how to build up a business, how to scale, how to use our solutions and actually apply them to your release, right? And how and that is the road towards scale up. That's the road towards independence, true independence, right?
Mhm.
And this is something that really hits home with me being an indie developer myself, right? Remember how earlier I said these are hard things to put in place. Well, you know what? We have turnkey solutions for this now that are essentially offered for free, right?
Yeah.
These are business tools, okay? Business tools that have been set up on a global scale, right? Uh, and we are offering it to anyone, whether it be a AAA studio or two guys in an apartment making their first game or turning their game jam product, their game jam game into an actual product that they can ship.
I think that was a major touch point and why I actually really wanted to have this conversation with you and why I was looking forward to it so much was that you see a company like Xsolla, the size of Xsolla and all the big partners, but it's every time I get to talk to you about these things, you are always pulling it back to the indies and all the newer studios because that's clearly what is near and dear to your heart. So that's why I'm glad we've been able to kind of get into that of how does that benefit them, which leads me into my next question. When you say scale up, right? So I think that could a term that a lot of studios can use differently. Some look at scaling up as being able to create more products. Some look at scaling up being able to increase revenue, grow your studio. Do you want 40, 50, 60 people? What does scaling up mean when it comes to what Xsolla is looking for and what you're looking to help with? Is it all of the above or is it something a little more specific?
So because we are offering business tools, the
Mhm.
first part of any scale up, regardless of your definition of scale up, whether that be
Revenue.
scaling up your staff or scaling up your number of games or scaling
Mhm.
up the ambition of a game, for example,
Mhm.
right? Making bigger and bigger games, more complex games. Um, it all requires money,
Yep.
right? But it
Mhm.
also requires knowing your audience in order to be successful in these things, right? And we offer both, right? We offer a means for you to make money, right? You know, the old adage, give a man a fish versus teach him how to fish,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
we have, here's a fishing rod, here's a basket, here's some lures, here's some bait, right? Right? That's what we do. That's the analogy, right?
Mhm.
And come with us. We'll take you on a journey. We'll show you how this is done. We're showing you how to make money so that you have the financial resources in order to apply for bigger grants or even scale up your team or make way more ambitious games down the road, right? Because now what you can do is not only you have control of your data and you have control of your audience and you have control of how you make money, you can refine that, right?
Mhm.
And it gets easier and easier as you do it, because now what happens is because you understand your audience, you can do much more intelligent targeting of your marketing dollars. You can stretch those out, and because you have more financial resources from your previous games, right,
Mhm.
or just recycling them into different regions of the world, right? What's old to me is new to you, right?
Mhm.
Right? You you can you have more resources to do this stuff, right? And you get more proficient with the tools over time. The indies of today are the enterprises of tomorrow,
There you go. There's your tagline.
right? That's my
Yep.
tagline. I'll say it. That's my shilly tagline. But you know, it's actually my tagline because I actually do believe that studios can grow. Like you just say Digital Extremes, for example. Like look
Yeah.
at them, what, 15, 20 years ago,
Mhm. Local success story. They're one of the best. We actually had them on one of the very first episodes of the podcast too. They're near and dear to the show.
right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's only a handful of them across the country,
Mhm. Yep.
right?
Of that scale, absolutely.
But for the most part, they started exactly like your hypothetical. They started
Mhm.
5 to 10 guys, right? They have a little niche audience. How do you get to the next step?
Mhm.
Right. And getting to the next step requires understanding business. It requires understanding distribution. It requires understanding marketing, right? And if you truly want to call yourself an indie developer, it behooves you to learn these things, right?
Mhm.
But we make it easier. That's where Xsolla comes in. We have the business side. The tools exist. The solutions exist, right? They've been designed, battle tested. It works, right? And this. You don't have to break your mind around that, right? All you have to do is how do you apply that to your company? How
Mhm.
do you apply that to your studio in order to scale up, right? And back in the example here, right? You get a mailing list. Guess what? That builds, right? That builds up your community. That builds up engagement, right? These are tools that are not available otherwise in the build it and yeet it on a platform model,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
But at the same token, I'm saying do the other platforms, do us, but do the other platforms. You want to be as wide, you want to cast as wide as net as possible, right? In order to capture audiences, in order to engage with them and build them up and build loyalty around your brand and build loyalty around your IPs so that when you come up with the next one or sequel, that's how you scale. Grow slowly and surely you're growing your brand, you're growing your games, you're growing your audiences, and it's within reach of everyone.
That does kind of set certain indies apart, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm not. It's not the game that they're working on next, which is obviously can be very exciting, but it's whatever that studio, right? Like there are certain studios that obviously come to mind that like even if they're a small independent studio, it doesn't matter what game they haven't announced yet. The fact that they're working on something else is what has this already like big group of people invested is the studio brand rather than just the IP, like the single IP itself.
Right. Right?
Yeah.
You want to bring people to your brand. So like when you know Scott's Games comes out with something, they know exactly what Scott's all about.
Yeah. That you already have that reputation like among that community, and then you're saying you can like grow that community.
Exactly.
And that also, that's a good point too, because we do talk about a lot of studios, right? Like Ontario, something we're incredibly proud of is some of the post-secondary programs and some of the great projects that come out of them when people do their keystone projects. But there's so many studios that start with a game. They don't start with a studio, right? It's like, we want to make this game. They don't think about, well, we need to make a studio and make a business around it. So having Xsolla as one of those potential avenues of, okay, we need to make a business to make this viable because we want this game to be bigger, we want this game to be better, and we want to make more. So like being able to use that as a potential avenue is obviously very helpful.
And we're there to help. We're here to we have an immense amount of knowledge and information that we can share freely. You know, and we've been doing this for a long time. So right, and that's why we can afford to be at every show, like you said.
Literally, it feels like I even have a note here saying Xsolla is everywhere, every conference, every show, and every stage. It feels like throughout the industry, and that's something that is makes you incredibly accessible, right?
Yeah,
It's that if it's like, oh, how do I get a call with them, or how do I set up with them? One, it's easy enough as it is. You clearly have enough people that is accessible, but find them on the show floor. That is every time you and me have talked has been at these conferences, right? And it's been easy to get in contact with Xsolla, whether you have a booth or whether you have people there. There's always a presence at any of our shows.
internationally, or like right now,
Mhm.
there's Bigs Festival going on, right?
Mhm.
And so there's part of my team that's there, like not Team Canada, but like more like the Americas team
Mhm.
is there, right? You go to Asia, we have teams in Asia, right? So G Star, Tokyo Game Shows, like it's guaranteed there's somebody there from Xsolla, right? Even in the Middle East, one of my colleagues has just got done with a conference in Dubai,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
We have teams in Europe. We have global coverage, right? And so if it's not Team Canada, there's somebody there from Xsolla,
There's
right?
someone that you can talk to and ask your more tailored questions. It's something we try to do again with this hypothetical situation of just a little more broad. But of course, yeah, you guys are available for those tailored questions and what can you do in a particular situation? Because every studio is different, every has different makeup, different goals, right? Different skill sets. So being able to have that conversation with a company like that, I'm sure be nothing but beneficial for both sides.
Right. And even if you don't end up working with us, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You still walk away with some value of talking to our people.
100%. Cool. So I honestly, I think that was exactly what we wanted it to be. I think that will about do it for episode 18 of the Lodge Podcast, season 3. John, any final words for our wonderful audience today?
I'm gonna take my Xsolla hat off for a minute, and I'm gonna speak to the Indies because I was there myself.
Mhm.
I'm gonna say, hold on to your dreams because they are within reach. You just need to climb the hill every day.
I love it, man. I love it. That's obviously the indies are near and dear to both of our hearts, and that's I think those are wise words. So again, thank you to our wonderful audience for always sticking around and staying tuned with us. Shout out to Natalie again on the ones and twos, making us look and sound great. A heartfelt thank you to Xsolla for being today's sponsor. And John, honestly, thank you for taking the time. I know you're all over the place. You were just in Calgary. I'll be seeing you in a couple of weeks in Toronto. And taking the time in your busy schedule to come and talk to our audience today about some of the great things that Xsolla has to offer, and having that indie heart kind of shine through every time. So everyone, remember to follow the Lodge on all of your social media platforms. Keep up with everything Ontario video games and interactive entertainment. Until next time, take care.